You're talking about things that happen to other people, not to yourself. The Time Machine, 1960, wasn't just another glossy MGM production. It was a daring gamble, an experiment in bringing H.G. Wells's visionary science fiction to life with practical effects, fragile miniatures, and sheer human determination. Behind the graceful time-lapse montages and futuristic sets lay chaos, props collapsing, schedules derailed, and actors nearly injured. What audiences didn't know was that this beloved classic was stitched together from near disasters. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on 20 weird facts about the Time Machine, 1960. From the battles with studio executives to bizarre on-set mishaps, we'll reveal secrets even hardcore sci-fi fans rarely hear. And wait until you discover the bonus fact, a jaw-dropping behind-the-scenes twist about the Time Machine prop itself. Strap in. This isn't just nostalgia, it's revelation. Let's travel back. The Time Machine was built from a barbershop chair. The film's iconic time machine wasn't born from sleek aerospace engineering, it was cobbled together from something far more mundane. The production designers took the base of an old barbershop chair and transformed it into a brass and crystal contraption. Why? Because the hydraulic swivel gave George's machine the perfect motion for launch. It wasn't just resourceful, it was risky. The heavy wood and spinning disc often wobbled under Rod Taylor's weight, forcing crew members to steady the contraption mid-scene. Yet what audiences saw on screen looked smooth, steady, almost mystical. The truth? Every take was a battle to keep the thing from toppling. MGM spent more money on paint and lighting tricks than on structural support. The irony is that this makeshift creation went on to become one of the most recognizable props in sci-fi cinema history. Not sleek futurism, but barbershop ingenuity. Yvette Mimieux was nearly blinded by Fast Five history. Studio lighting. When actress Yvette Mimieux, playing Weena, filmed the futuristic Eloy sequences, she faced brutal working conditions. MGM's soundstages were notorious for high-intensity carbon arc lamps which could reach blinding brightness. During one scene by the river, Mimieux's eyes began watering uncontrollably. Crew members later admitted the lights were so hot you could fry an egg on the set. The irony? These intense lamps were required to create the illusion of the shimmering, utopian world of 802,701. But behind the camera, Mimieux reportedly wore sunglasses between takes to protect her vision. At just 17 years old during filming, she endured hours under those punishing lights, an ordeal that left her with headaches and nausea. What audiences remember as glowing utopia was, in truth, a set that tested the resilience of its star. The future looked bright, painfully bright. Rod Taylor was injured during the lava sequence, that dramatic scene of lava slowly engulfing a future London. It wasn't just movie magic. Rod Taylor, who played George, insisted on doing much of the sequence himself, but the mixture used to simulate molten lava was a thick, bubbling chemical compound heated under the lights. During one take, Taylor slipped on the unstable set floor and burned his hand. Instead of halting production, he wrapped the injury and carried on. Director George Pal admired Taylor's grit, saying, "Rod gave us the realism we couldn't fake. It wasn't just method acting, it was physical risk." The result is that the tense panic you see in his eyes isn't just acting, it's a man genuinely in pain. The lava may have been fake, but the danger was very real. A sci-fi spectacle became a near-workplace accident. George Pal clashed with MGM executives. Director George Pal was a visionary, but MGM's executives were skeptical. Sci-fi was still considered a cheap genre in 1960, and the studio pressured Pal to cut corners. At one point, executives even suggested removing the Morlocks entirely, claiming audiences wouldn't take monsters seriously. Pal fought back, insisting that without the Morlocks, the entire allegory of humanity's downfall would collapse. He nearly walked away from the project in protest. Ironically, the Morlocks became one of the most unforgettable elements of the film, haunting viewers with their pale faces and glowing eyes. Pal's stubbornness saved the story, but it came at a cost. MGM slashed his budget for miniatures and effects. What audiences didn't see was a director constantly wrestling to preserve Wells's spirit against corporate cynicism. Not compromise, but conviction kept this vision alive. The Morlock costumes were suffocating. The underground-dwelling Morlocks terrified audiences, but they nearly suffocated the actors inside. Made of heavy foam rubber and fur, the costumes trapped heat, making it impossible for stunt performers to breathe properly. During long shooting days, actors fainted inside the suits, forcing crew to slice openings for ventilation. Even worse, the glowing eyes were powered by small battery-operated lights strapped dangerously close to their faces. At least 2 performers suffered burns from overheated wiring. Director George Pal pushed the limits of practical effects, but the human toll was hidden. To audiences, the Morlocks looked like alien predators. To the men inside, they were ovens of pain. Behind the fantasy of monsters lurked the real terror of suffocating on a Hollywood soundstage. The costumes worked, but they nearly broke the people who wore them. The miniature sets were constantly collapsing. The time-lapse sequences, flowers blooming, cities rising, buildings decaying, were the crown jewels of The Time Machine. But those intricate miniature sets were fragile nightmares. Entire cityscapes were built out of plaster and cardboard, designed to be destroyed on camera. Problem? They collapsed at the wrong time. Crew, members recalled that a single vibration on the soundstage floor could send an entire future skyline tumbling before the cameras rolled. One infamous incident saw a full day's work reduced to rubble when a technician accidentally sneezed near the models. George Pal was relentless, demanding rebuilds overnight to stay on schedule. What audiences saw as seamless evolution was, in truth, a battlefield of broken miniatures, with the effects team constantly patching, painting, and gluing. The sequence dazzled critics, but the price was near chaos on the workshop floor. Not effortless movie magic, fragile persistence. The time-lapse sequences took weeks for seconds of film. When George sits in his machine and the world outside speeds through centuries, audiences gasped. But those time-lapse photography tricks were painfully slow to film. The crew had to shoot 1 frame at a time with motion control rigs, adjusting props between exposures. Each blink of the sun took hours. Weeks of work often translated to mere seconds of screen time. Worse, the cameras sometimes jammed mid-sequence, forcing resets that wasted days. Actor Rod Taylor described sitting for hours in a fixed position, pretending the world blurred around him while nothing actually moved. The irony is that what felt effortless on screen was excruciatingly deliberate in production. Every flower blooming in fast forward was the result of patience bordering on madness. Not time travel, but time torture for the effects team. Winston Churchill nearly inspired the time traveler's look. Rod Taylor's Victorian gentleman scientist was dashing, but early costume tests looked very different. MGM executives originally suggested modeling George's wardrobe after Winston Churchill, thinking audiences would relate to a stocky, cigar-wielding figure of authority. George Pal fought against it, believing it would reduce Wells's idealist to a caricature. Instead, Taylor's George was styled as a refined adventurer with waistcoats, scarves, and a romantic, windswept image. What audiences didn't know was that costume designer Walter Plunkett had already sketched full Churchill-inspired prototypes. The rejected look lingered in studio archives, a reminder of how close we came to a completely different hero, not suave innovator, but pudgy politician. In the end, Pal's instinct preserved the film's timeless appeal, an explorer of ideas, not an imitation of politics. The studio recycled props from Forbidden Planet MGM wasn't about to waste money building everything from scratch. Sharp-eyed fans have since spotted several props recycled from Forbidden Planet, 1956. Computer banks, futuristic chairs, and even blinking console lights found their way into the Eloy City scenes. It wasn't laziness, it was necessity. With PAL's budget slashed, the art department raided MGM's prop warehouse like scavengers. Ironically, these reused props gave the time machine a richer sci-fi texture, linking it accidentally to one of the genre's classics. At the time, most viewers didn't notice. Today, fans obsess over the crossover details. What seems like continuity was really penny-pinching. Not a bespoke future, but a recycled past, dressed up as tomorrow. Hollywood's thriftiness became cinematic world-building decades before audiences coined the term. The famous stop-motion skeleton nearly didn't happen. One of the most haunting sequences shows George watching the world burn, skeletons crumbling in accelerated decay. That shot wasn't planned, it was a last-minute stop-motion experiment. Animator Hua Chang suggested building a full skeleton prop and filming its collapse frame by frame. MGM executives resisted, calling it ghoulish and too grim for audiences. But George Pal approved the test in secret, betting it would sell the apocalypse better than any matte painting. When dailies came back, even the skeptical execs admitted it was breathtaking. The effect took days for seconds of film, but it delivered an image that burned into memory. The twist? That skeleton wasn't studio-made. It was purchased from a medical supply company, a genuine anatomical teaching model. What looked like fantasy was grounded in bone-deep reality. Rod Taylor nearly walked off the film. By the midpoint of production, Rod Taylor, usually the picture of professionalism, was close to quitting. Why? MGM's tight shooting schedule left him filming for 16-hour days, often without breaks. The time machine set was hot, claustrophobic, and unforgiving. Taylor later admitted he felt like he was losing his mind, trapped in a chair while the world spun past. Tensions boiled when he asked for additional rest days and the studio refused. George Pal, fearing disaster, personally convinced Taylor to stay by promising him more creative input. Taylor agreed, but only barely. Ironically, that sense of exhaustion seeped into his performance, giving George's time traveler an edge of restless desperation. What audiences saw as curiosity mixed with weariness was partly real frustration. And speaking of frustration, go ahead and like and subscribe because the next 9 facts get even crazier. The Morlocks' screams were human voices, distorted. Those chilling screeches echoing in the underground tunnels weren't crafted from animal recordings or sci-fi synthesizers. Instead, sound designers had actors scream into metal pipes while technicians slowed the recordings and added distortion. The result was otherworldly, almost mechanical, yet rooted in raw human terror. What's wild is that crew members reported losing their voices for days after recording sessions. MGM brass thought it was too disturbing for younger audiences, but Pal insisted. The Eloy are childlike, he argued. The Morlocks must feel like nightmares. And they did. Not robotic monsters, but amplified human agony. The unsettling effect stuck with audiences long after leaving the theater, proving that sometimes the scariest sounds don't come from machines, but from people pushed to their limits in a recording booth. Yvette Mimieux's swimming scene was almost fatal. The seemingly idyllic scene of George saving Weena from drowning in the river was anything but safe. MGM used a real water tank with hidden current pumps to simulate rushing water. During one take, Mimieux slipped and was dragged under. Crew members scrambled, pulling her out seconds before she lost consciousness. Rod Taylor later admitted that his panic in that scene wasn't acting. He truly feared Mimieux was about to drown. Insurance representatives demanded reshoots with tighter safety protocols, but PAL used the original footage because the fear looked too authentic to discard, not staged peril, but near tragedy. What audiences saw as romantic heroism was, in fact, a dangerous brush with disaster for a 17-year-old actress, whose vulnerability made the sequence unforgettable and horrifying in retrospect. The Eloy sets were built on swampy ground. The serene gardens and riverbanks of the Eloy world hid an inconvenient truth. MGM built those exterior sets on unstable, swampy ground in California. As the crew hauled in elaborate faux stone structures, the earth shifted, causing entire walls to lean at odd angles. One day, a fountain centerpiece collapsed into the mud, nearly crushing an extra. Crew members spent hours reinforcing the ground with planks just to keep props upright. The irony? The instability actually enhanced the dreamlike look of the Eloy city, with buildings appearing slightly off and otherworldly. What audiences saw as alien architecture was, in reality, construction failure. Not deliberate artistry, but improvisation forced by sinking soil. The future looked ethereal on screen, but behind the scenes, it was built on shaky foundations literally. MGM wanted to cut the ending altogether. The final sequence, where George disappears into the future with the time machine, is now iconic. But MGM executives initially demanded it be removed. They argued the ambiguous ending would confuse audiences and preferred a happy wrap-up where George stayed in his own time. George Pal fought tooth and nail, insisting Wells's theme of human curiosity demanded the open-ended conclusion. In fact, Pal refused to shoot an alternate ending despite direct studio orders, betting they wouldn't dare fire him so late in production. His gamble paid off. Preview audiences loved the unresolved mystery, and MGM relented. Not studio compromise, but directorial defiance saved the ending. Without it, The Time Machine might have been just another forgotten B-movie. Instead, it became a cultural landmark, inviting viewers to dream beyond the frame. The Time Machine's control panel was constantly malfunctioning. That ornate control panel with its glowing levers and spinning dials looked futuristic on screen, but in reality, it was a fragile mess. The wiring was hastily done with dozens of hidden cables running under the seat. Every time Rod Taylor pulled the brass lever, half the bulbs flickered out. Crew members had to crawl beneath the machine to manually jiggle wires and reset connections between takes. Taylor later joked that he felt like he was riding a broken amusement park ride. Yet on film, the panel gleamed with precision, convincing audiences they were seeing cutting-edge technology. What looked sleek was, in fact, chaos disguised by clever camera angles. Not high-tech wizardry, but duct tape and desperation. The irony is that those unreliable switches later inspired real sci-fi set designers who copied their look without knowing the pain they caused. The soundstage nearly caught fire during the climactic fight with the Morlocks. Pyrotechnics were used to simulate fire spreading through the underground caverns. But one spark hit a piece of flammable set dressing, and flames began climbing faster than anyone expected. Extras in heavy Morlock suits panicked as crew members rushed in with extinguishers. For a moment, chaos reigned, and the production nearly lost its elaborate cavern sets. George Pal insisted on finishing the sequence that same day, refusing to let the scare derail his schedule. The frightening truth? The glowing walls audiences saw weren't just special effects. At least some of that fire was very real. Not carefully staged spectacle, but barely controlled disaster. Ironically, the intensity of the flames gave the scene its terrifying realism, a moment when the fantasy nearly consumed the film itself. The score was almost replaced at the last minute. Russell Garcia's sweeping orchestral score became one of the film's defining elements, but executives nearly tossed it. Early test screenings revealed mixed reactions. Some thought the music was too grand for a small sci-fi picture. MGM briefly commissioned a cheaper, minimalist replacement, but George Pal fought back. He argued that without Garcia's score, the film would lose its emotional core. At one point, Garcia himself feared his work would never be heard. Only after critics praised the score's early cues did MGM back off. Today, Garcia's lush music is remembered as one of the greatest sci-fi scores of the era. What almost vanished in the cutting room became immortal. Not background filler, but the heartbeat of the film, a reminder that sound can define the soul of cinema. The film won an Oscar on a shoestring. Despite MGM's constant budget slashing, The Time Machine shocked Hollywood by winning the 1961 Academy Award for Best Special Effects. The irony? The effects team worked with a fraction of what major productions enjoyed. George Pal's crew reused props, improvised with household items, and filmed stop motion in cramped spaces. One technician later admitted that the famous fast-growing plants sequence was achieved with celery stalks photographed in reverse. What critics hailed as groundbreaking artistry was, in reality, thrift disguised as innovation. Winning the Oscar validated Pal's vision and embarrassed studio executives who had doubted him. Not lavish spending, but ingenuity secured the film's place in history. The Time Machine proved you didn't need millions, just creativity, stubbornness, and a willingness to gamble on the impossible. H.G. Wells's family objected to the film. While audiences embraced The Time Machine, the descendants of author H.G. Wells were less thrilled. They objected to MGM's romantic subplot between George and Weena, claiming it betrayed Wells's intentions. They also disliked the film's softened social critique, which toned down the novel's darker warnings about class and industry. At one point, Wells's grandson reportedly considered legal action but was persuaded otherwise. George Pal defended his choices, insisting that cinema required emotional connection beyond pure allegory. Ironically, this very tension between fidelity to Wells's ideas and Hollywood's demand for romance gave the film its enduring power. It wasn't just a story about time travel. It was about the compromises between art and commerce. Not total faithfulness, but transformation. And in that transformation, the movie carved its place in cinematic history. The Time Machine prop itself vanished. After filming wrapped, the iconic Time Machine sat neglected on MGM's backlot, gathering dust. Years later, it disappeared entirely. Rumors spread. Some claimed it was destroyed in storage. Others whispered that a collector spirited it away. Decades later, prop restorer Bob Burns revealed he had tracked down the battered remains and painstakingly rebuilt it in his collection. But the mystery remains, how did one of cinema's most famous props simply vanish under MGM's watch? Fans still debate whether parts of the original machine are lost forever. What audiences see as a timeless invention on screen became, in reality, a relic that slipped through time itself. Not just fiction, but a real-world disappearance. The machine's legacy proves that sometimes the greatest mystery isn't on film, it's what happens after the cameras stop rolling. The Time Machine wasn't just a sci-fi adventure, it was a miracle stitched from chaos, accidents, and defiance. Every shimmering effect, every eerie sound, every daring risk came at a price. Yet, the film endured, shaping the way audiences imagine time travel for generations. Its prop may have vanished, but its impact remains eternal.